I want to talk about a new update that just happened recently when it comes to VeChain, even though nothing I say is financial advice. Now, what do I mean by this? Of course, I'm going to be talking about the recent upgrade, so to speak, and that is called Hayabusa when it comes to VeChain. However, when it comes to Hayabusa, oftentimes people only focus on the tokenomics when it comes to VET and kind of the improvements that it had when it comes to that. But I want to take a different approach. I want to talk about the aspect of interoperability when it comes to Hayabusa, which oftentimes people don't really talk about. Now, I'll talk about the price of VET later on in the video, which is the primary native token of VeChain, but I first want to talk about the aspect of interoperability because even though it's not that interesting, some people may argue, but at the same time, I would say that it is pretty interesting for me because if I take a look at just interoperability, right? Or should I say lacking interoperability? Many blockchains out there, because a lot of them, they're independent of one another, right? A lot of networks, they're independent of one another. As a result of that, a lot of them can't, freely interact with one another. That's how I'd like to kind of explain it quite simply. And then if that is the case, arguably, they do lack interoperability in some instances. Now, that's kind of like not such a hypothetically good thing, I guess, in some instances, because imagine if I'm using like T-Mobile and I can't call my friend who's using AT&T just because I'm using a different carrier. Now, of course, that isn't something that actually exists, that issue, right? But I'm just saying, in a make-believe scenario, imagine if in this hypothetical, phone carriers were not interoperable. Like, how would that be such a good thing? That's just my perspective. But in the blockchain space, just because it's still relatively speaking kind of like up and coming, right? So then some of these issues, they do still persist, which is why I do like that aspect when it comes to interoperability, when it comes to Hayabusa. Now, when it comes to Hayabusa, did a lot of people ask for it? Now, to my understanding, not really. I mean, like, if VeChain didn't do this, I don't think I would care. Like, for instance, having Hayabusa, to me, it does not make me like VeChain more or less. You know what I mean? Like, let's say they didn't even do this, I wouldn't even really kind of think about it, right? But I think it's kind of a sign that maybe VeChain treats the project pretty seriously in terms of the team. Now, what will it do in terms of the hypothetical price? I mean, I cannot control that. But in terms of just taking the project seriously, it seems like they care. It's like, for instance, let's say I train very seriously when it comes to basketball. Does it mean I'm going to be in the NBA? Absolutely not. You know what I mean? But I'm just saying, at least I'm taking the training seriously. So that's just kind of the way I take a look at this. VeChain, despite all this, I don't think it's going to ever overtake something like, BNB or Ethereum or Solana or something like that. But it's a thought that counts, right? And, it's pretty difficult sometimes to be like top 5 or top 10. So it's not really hypothetically necessary, in my opinion, anyways, in some cases. So I'm not necessarily disappointed by this. I'm actually pretty happy to see, the interoperability aspect side of things when it comes to Hayabusa. Now, when it comes to Hayabusa, I get it. Again, the main thing is kind of like the tokenomics of VET and all this. But personally, for me, even though I'm still looking at that as well, I also focus on the interoperability side of things because I think that's pretty interesting, because I feel like a lot of blockchains hypothetically could maybe do pretty okay as a result of having pretty okay interoperability, but that is just my perception when it comes to this. Now, when it comes to VeChain, people like to say, people don't really care about it because they're focused on something that's not that interesting, which is supply chain management. Now, I'll say this, I don't think that is actually the most interesting thing out there to be focused on. Personally, for me, like, I'm not going to be entering into this space just because of projects that are focused on supply chain management, right? But at the same time, it's pretty unique, right? Seeing a project really focus on a market like that because it's not necessarily the most kind of trendy market, but at the same time, it feels like it's a market that already has sort of this established presence. When it comes to supply chain management, it's not something necessarily that new or something like that. It's already been around for a long time, that market. And hypothetically, if it's still around for, let's say, quite a while in the future, it wouldn't necessarily surprise me either. So I kind of like that approach. It's a more sort of, I think, boring, I would say, sort of approach. But then at the same time, I think it's a little bit more not as unsustainable as some other projects out there, which are only focused on a certain trend. But what happens if that certain aspect is no longer trendy? What's going to happen? What's going to happen to the project? That's just my point of view. Now, the thing is, when it comes to VeChain, actually, when it comes to VET in particular, the primary native token of VeChain, people like to say, oh, but Hayabusa is not really doing anything when it comes to it. Well, here's the thing. I mean, altcoins are not doing the best. You know what I mean? However, even despite this being, I think, arguably pretty impressive for VeChain in and of itself, if the altcoin space isn't doing the best, VET just simply won't really, I think, do much in the grand scheme of things when it comes to, again, its primary native token. Now, the thing is this, though. I would arguably say that fundamentally, I actually like VeChain more when compared to back then. Even though when I take a look at the market cap of VET as of right now, at like almost even below a billion, right? I saw this back in 2023, 2022, and as well as 2020. If we take a look at it, actually back in 2024, I've never seen, VET have a market cap of below 1.5 billion. That's just my point of view. So let's say a project that I'm a fan of actually became arguably, I think, better fundamentally, and then the market cap levels are basically back at that 2020, 2022, and 2023 levels, would I be complaining? I don't think I would actually, but that's just my perspective. Because again, my hypothetical thing is dollar cost averaging. So if a project became better fundamentally, but then the market cap kind of is basically where it once was years ago, I'm not going to be complaining about that. However, it would be a different case if, let's say, the project kind of regressed fundamentally. Now, of course, then that's a different case, but it doesn't feel like that to me, especially considering, again, something like Hayabusa. Now, what is VeChain going to do moving forward? I mean, only time will tell. But at the same time, I seem to like what they're doing in terms of actually developing the project, right? Because some other projects out there, once they do pretty okay, they just kind of don't really care anymore. But this one seems to actually be caring more about what's going on with the project, right? And at least still updating, kind of developing, and at least doing something when it comes to it. Sometimes I think it's kind of like the thought that counts. That's just my perspective. Now, also, when I take a look at something like that, people like to say, oh, when it comes to this, sure, the market cap is around a billion, but then at the same time, it's still around 23 times lower than 30 cents. Totally aware of that, but in the grand scheme of things, my perspective is that I sometimes don't want to just only believe in a project when it's doing pretty okay, because sometimes I want to be a part of that journey. Now, this is just personally my kind of perception when it comes to this. I'm not telling anyone to do anything. However, I could easily not care about VeChain. It's like, for instance, let's say I'm watching Jumanji. Do I have to finish watching the movie? Absolutely not. Like, you know what I mean, right? But then I finished watching it anyways. This is kind of the mindset that I have somewhat in this sense. When it comes to watching a movie, I don't necessarily have to do it, but then at the same time, I want to see the whole movie for me to kind of give an evaluation of that. In this instance, my kind of analogy is that I don't think I've seen an altcoin season during this cycle, so how can I fully evaluate this cycle? That's just my point of view. So this is why I haven't stopped believing in some projects out there. Now, again, I don't have to do it, right? I mean, I could easily not care about it, but I just feel like I want to believe in projects that I do like fundamentally, and I also feel like I haven't seen altcoin season, so I'm still staying patient. But then at the same time, when it comes to even maybe the idea of hypothetically 30 cents, the market cap at that point, considering current circulating supply, would be around 26 billion. So, I mean, it's basically like uncharted territory for something like that. But actually, back in 2021, the market cap of VET was nearly 14 billion. So 26 billion is not over 2 times that, right? It's almost 2 times that, but I'm just saying. Like, I also feel like back then, actually, within this space, the factors, to me, didn't seem as kind of, I would say, enthusiastic as right now, arguably, because in the peak of that bull run, right, back in 2021, we saw around 300 million owners within this space, but now supposedly there's over 600 million. But then again, some people might be thinking, oh, where's the altcoin season, all this? I mean, I don't have the answers to that question because I can't control the market, right? I don't have those capabilities. But then at the same time, if I thought back in 2021, let's say back in November, oh, where's the altcoin season? At that moment in time, I would not have known, right, when exactly there was going to be hypothetically an altcoin season or not. But then we saw a bunch of altcoins back in 2021, around April, around May at that time, they did do pretty okay. So yeah, I mean, that's just my point of view. I'll never know until there is one. So then to me, I'm just going to stay patient. That's about it. But that's the only thing I can do. So yeah, I'm just holding, waiting. That's pretty much about it. But in the meantime, though, I do like what I'm seeing when it comes to VeChain and how they're still caring about the project, especially in terms of this Hayabusa upgrade, basically. But yeah, that's pretty much about it. I wanted to make a updated video real quick, and I just want to say thank you for watching. I hope y'all have a nice day. It's Mali the Captain, and I'll catch y'all on the next one. I'm out. Peace. Bye.